Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be looking at the big news that came out earlier this week, and that is that all 8 UFL GMs have been fired, or they parted ways, basically fired, as well as a major change to head coaches. Now, this is a story that I kind of was hoping something else was going to come out from it over the past few days, and in typical UFL news fashion, nothing else really came out. Now, when the story initially came out, like within a couple hours, you had more info come out as we now know that a couple of these GMs might be brought back in a different role. But overall, it's very controversial news because some people actually do like the changes they're doing, but a lot of people really don't. So let's get right into this with the initial Larson tweet saying developing UFL's parted ways with all 8 of their general managers, saying this is a move that isn't cost cutting, it's to Rapol's vision, which is true. This is one of the few times where a move that feels like obvious cost cutting really is pretty clearly not. This goes with what Rapolo has been saying about wanting to have more centralized stuff and certain locally based things, which we'll talk about in a bit. So it's really not shocking, and it's not like this is, at all false in terms of it being cost cutting versus legitimate. It seems like this is legitimate what the plan is, and we'll talk about why it's really obviously not cost cutting with another big change. But let's go on to the story that PFN put out. Now, this is the one that shows, all 8 of the general managers that are being let go. But a couple of these guys are potentially going to be brought back as scouts for their or regional scouts for part of their team, as they plan to hire 4 regional scouts as part of their recurring structures. And some of the people who could get that were explained to be potentially like Jim Monos or Vaughn Hutchins, which makes a lot of sense that some of these guys are going to be brought back for very obvious reasons, especially ones that have been good GMs. I feel like have a good chance of being brought back. So you've got all 8 of those guys who are being parted ways with. And this is one of those things that's definitely it's definitely a very controversial thing. Now you have Doug Whaley and Russ Giglio will be heading up the personnel administration, and then Russ Brandon will actually be taking up a new role, and that is going to be the fact that he is going to be the CEO, or he's going to be the EVP of football operations. He is going to be the final boss when it comes to the overall player construction or roster construction. Now, Mike Rapol is taking full command of the business side officially. That's all marketing, ticketing, venues, partnerships, revenue, and all that. GM title eliminated. Obviously, every head coach is now becoming a full-time, full-year contract. That's a big deal. That is a massive change. One of the biggest criticisms people had of the UFL is the fact that coaches were on seasonal contracts. The fact they now have full-time contracts is a massive deal. And this also means that they're going to have expanded input in their 53-man rosters. But obviously, like I said, sign-offs are going to be Brandon. Now, when it comes to this one, and they do say, Mitchell does say expect formal announcements by Thanksgiving and new head coach contracts, meaning that we should find out all 8 head coaches within the next couple weeks. But when it comes to the head coaches getting more say in their rosters, if you're a USFL fan, this doesn't really mean that much to you in terms of like, oh my God, it's going to be different. Because the 2022 USFL, there was like the Maulers, I believe, were the only team that had an official GM. Every other team was the head coach basically controlling the entire roster. So this is not something new whatsoever. And I would say this to some people might be good. Now, I say to some because if you're a Houston fan, you are probably shitting yourself thinking, oh my God, if CJ's back, our team is cooked. Because of the fact that his best season in spring football was when he took over a roster that was built by Kevin Sumlin. And then since then, the only other time he had a marginal amount of success was when he had a GM come in and overhaul the roster himself. So that's funny, but like for this USFL guys who were in 2022, which is at this point, Skip Holtz, is another advantage for the Stallions. If you're a Stallions fan, you're actually ecstatic about this change because you're like, man, we have a guy that's already done this before, and that'll be huge for us. So for them, it's not really a big deal. But the overall year-round contracts is a massive thing because it also makes it a higher chance for coaches to stick around longer. Because a big thing where some coaches were questionable to return for 2024 or 2025 was the fact they were getting seasonal contracts instead of full year-round contracts. And obviously, it might be a bit of a pay increase. You don't know for sure, but it's a good thing overall. Now, in terms of stuff to really talk about is the fact that you now have a centralized hub of doing this sort of, roster construction. And the reason that I think this is a very bad, or just at least poorly timed decision, is first and foremost because you just had a major betting scandal. You just had a major scandal where you had a player in Terry Rozier basically arrested by the FBI because of allegedly fixing his own player prop bets. Basically, he took himself out of the game and, told people about it. which is a big no-no, obviously. And you've had other guys like Jonte Porter getting lifelong bans. You've had many other players in leagues getting banned for betting. Why am I bringing that up? Well, if you have a singular head of every single roster move that they have to finalize, it means you are opening the door for very obvious and blatant favoritism with certain teams. Now, in certain scenarios, this really wouldn't be the worst deal. Like, let's call it like it is. If, like, yes, obviously you have the script, the NFL is script writers saying it, but let's say Roger Goodell had to make final say in the same way they're doing with here. It wouldn't be nearly the same because the UFL has already not been allegedly, they've been admittedly giving preferred treatment to specific teams, i.e. the Battlehawks. Nothing against Battlehawks fans, but everybody knows, even Battlehawks fans know, that the league has done everything they can to get them to a championship game. They have put the championship game in St. Louis back-to-back years, especially the second year where everybody knows they shouldn't have. They have made it to where the Battlehawks get an extra home game that they shouldn't have gotten last year at San Antonio. Instead of putting it in another San Antonio place or somewhere in Texas, they put it in St. Louis. They've already done stuff like that before. They've, made it to where because of the prices of getting a playoff game like with Ford Field, the Stallions guaranteed a home playoff spot game when they really shouldn't have, So you have a league that already has proven to do decisions that, while sometimes, like the Birmingham one, is just purely like the insane amount of money you have to pay for, Ford Field. But with teams like St. Louis, they have done things that are clearly biased. And so when you have a league that already has shown bias to specific teams, now you're having one guy head over the entire rosters, it doesn't seem super fair. Now, another issue is the potential of, does this mean that if a team, like let's say two teams want the same player and Russ has to make a choice on who gets them, how exactly is this going to work? Because, things like big names, touted draft pick versus actual quality player are very different things. Because again, as I've tried to say many times before, just because you were good in the NFL does not mean you're going to be good in the UFL. Just because you were a top draft pick does not mean you're going to be good here. Again, Kimdichie versus Speaks. Speaks made the team, Kimdichie didn't. Speaks was great, Kimdichie didn't make the team, and he was a highly touted pick, or a higher touted pick than Speaks. Then obviously you have another one, Wayne Gallman. I remember a lot of people saying, oh, he's going to be super good for the Battlehawks, and I said, chill, hold your horses. He might not be that guy. He wasn't that guy. He wasn't terrible, but Jacob Sales was just clearly better. So what happens if you have a team that ends up being terrible? Like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, they move the Showboats to Louisville, and then there's a former first-round pick that is coming to the league, and let's say the Showboats want him, and so do the Stallions, and Russ says, oh, well, the Showboats need him more, so we'll go there. But he doesn't actually fit the roster, and he ends up sucking, but you put him there. You know what I mean? It's just, it opens a major door for criticism that isn't good for the league, I feel like. And obviously when you have a league like this where you have a guy coming in and taking full control, and he basically put a team in Louisville because he wanted a team in Louisville, you now open another door where if the Kings end up being really good, you're going to have people saying, well, of course they're good. Rapoport told Russ to make all the best players go to Louisville if, Louisville and another team are picking them. You see what I'm saying? It's opening a door for criticism you really don't want to have open. And the fact that the regional scouts, I actually do like it. But here's the thing, right? In terms of the roster changes that he wants to do, really, I feel like the only thing should be regional drafts. Which I know he's talked about wanting to get more regional players, guys who played college in the area on teams that I actually agree with fully. But that's all it really should be. You shouldn't change too much else. Now, when it comes to the GMs taking, in a vacuum, I'm actually not against this if it was done a bit differently. If it instead was done where you slashed the GMs, kept 4 of them, made them regional scouts, and you made the head coaches basically a head coach GM hybrid, and obviously you gave them that full contract and a bit of a pay raise, I think that in that way, number one, you would actually save some money, and number two, I think that would still work, and if anything, be better, because now the coaches are getting, even more experience in a lot of ways, and it also means that a potential GM could get a head coaching job, just for the sake of if they're good enough to evaluate talent at the offensive and defense coordinator positions. It honestly could work and could make a very intriguing sort of, story. But instead of doing it like this, I don't know. It feels like you're opening a door for criticism. I feel like that a lot of people who have issues with this are kind of justified in it, where it's a lot, of questions you have to ask about it. And it's just, this is one of the moves I'm not the biggest fan of, because again, Rapolo thing with him is that he's been somebody who clearly has his vision, and in some ways it's a great thing because the way that they're making all these changes screams we're going to be here for 2027. As I mentioned, 2027 is a season that really doesn't feel like it's going to happen for sure, but with all these moves, it actually feels more and more likely, even if they're moves you don't really agree with, because they're making these big changes. But at the same time, he's at times shown that he's not really in touch with spring football fandom. Like the 5-year comment, talking about how like no players shouldn't be in the league for more than 5 years. It's like no, like those are the guys that are usually the most well liked and most well received and are great to have on a roster. So that's just wrong to a lot of people. And this one is another one that a lot of people really aren't a fan of, because you have the GMs building these teams with the head coach. And like I said, having the head coach be head coach GM is not something that's new, and it's not something I'm against. But when you have this centralized sort of final say in a more, not just like an, oh, it's official, like, oh yeah, we just got to pass through it, more of like, okay, this guy has final say in rosters, but he's not part of a team, he's part of the league, makes questions for, are you going to try and build a more competitive league just because, we've had the past couple seasons where certain teams are just, we know by week 3 they're not making the playoffs. I don't know. Overall, though, let me know your thoughts down below. This one, it was a bit of a yap session, the second half of it. But like I said, I was kind of hoping we get more news about this, but I still feel like we have to put a video out for this because this was such a big story. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes out again before Thanksgiving. Hopefully, we find out all 8 head coaches. Like I said in the video I put out, I think it was last week, I talked about this. It may have been 2 weeks ago. I really do feel like we're probably going to get 3 head coaching changes, and it depends on changes. Like, I think Party has a very real shot of moving to Houston just because it would just make so much sense. You brought back the Gamblers. Part of the reason is because obviously the Roughnecks Gamblers experiment failed drastically. Instead of just keeping one or the other, tried to do that hybrid and then try to blame it on the USLPA when it's like, dude, you should have just, bit the bullet and called them the Gamblers. And now you're back to the Gamblers. So if you put Party there, hey, it kind of makes sense. It's the new version of the Party that we saw in the back of the day. It makes sense there. And then probably 2 new coaches in the 2 other expansion cities that aren't wherever the Panthers moved to. So hopefully we get that news within the next couple weeks, obviously. Hopefully find out more info about, the actual season upcoming. Because again, there's still a lot of stuff we don't really know. And like I said, that video where I talked about things that we're still waiting on 150 days left before the season starts, this doesn't really answer them. It just actually raises more questions. So it's weird. But if you did enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. Think about becoming a community member for as low as 9 cents a month. You get an exclusive monthly video that's a sports video that's not about the UFL, as well as other benefits like team emojis in the comments and chat. And speaking about chat, I will be live tomorrow on the 9th, starting at 12:45 p.m. EST for the Panthers-Saints game. So be on the lookout for that as well. And as always, guys, have a great night.